response from anybody, so I guess I assumed that everybody was gonna make it.
I totally intended to.
I think our bylaws say we're supposed to contact you
If we're not gonna do that.
if we're not going to do that.
No
Yes.
news is good news.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was also
We
happy to
are
look
now
back at
streaming,
after-
so it is 4:31 and I will call our first meeting of 2023 to order. And per our bylaws, at the first meeting of the year, our first agenda item is to elect a chair and a vice chair to serve for the year. So are there any nominations for chair?
I nominate Emily.
Is there a
I
second?
second that.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to take an anonymous vote? Seeing none, we'll vote by a show of hands. All in favor of Emily Campbell serving for 2023 as the chair, say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. And now I'll take nominations for a co-chair.
I'll nominate Opie.
Okay, is there a second?
Second that.
All right, would anyone like to take an anonymous vote? Seeing none, we'll raise our hands. All in favor of OB, and that is unanimous. So we have our chair and our co-chair. Okay, we will
Thanks,
move
Obi.
on to citizens to be heard. Are there any citizens online who would like to make a statement? We don't have any public hearings, so if you would like to make a comment, this is your opportunity to do so. You'll have another chance around 6 o'clock. If you could go ahead and put something in the chat that you're here to make a comment, we'll go ahead and call you. And just give that just a moment to see if anyone responds.
I may or may not.
Oh, why don't you, yes,
I
okay.
don't
so
know if my letter as a citizen,
Do you want to explain that you're going to recuse and just kind of tee this up that you wrote as a citizen? This would be the best time to do that.
yes, so I don't know, the agenda item where we're talking about the AEH, workforce housing, and HDHO. I'll be recusing myself since my wife and I have a HDHO project being constructed currently. So I wrote a letter as a citizen, just giving our thoughts based on experience. I mean, we're over 5 years into the process, so we've got some thoughts on it. So you all have that. It's a little lengthy, have fun. I could read it during Citizens to be Heard, or
If there's anything that you do want to point out, you're more than welcome. This would be your chance to make that comment.
just have a look at it.
All right. Anyone else here to make a comment? Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment that Thomas Lockmar is going to be speaking at the MOP meeting. So that's the Moab Area Watershed Partnership meeting. He, on the 18th, from 1 to 3 at the Mart. And he is a person who has reviewed all the studies of water for Spanish Valley, Moab. And so he will give you his kind of take on the strengths of those studies and what he pulls out of those studies. Should be very interesting, and it's an open meeting for anybody who wants to come.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else here to make a comment for citizens to be heard? Seeing none, we will move on to ex parte communications and disclosures. We have no action items or public hearings on the agenda. And one of our commissioners just disclosed and refused for one discussion item. Any other comments anyone needs to disclose? Okay, seeing none, we'll moving on to approval of meeting minutes from December 12th. Does anyone have any edits to suggest or as amendments to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adopt or approve the meeting minutes.
I move we approve the minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion from OB to approve the meeting minutes from December 12th, seconded by Steve Evers. Any discussion? Seeing none, raise your hand in favor of the motion, and that is unanimous. 6 approving, 1 absent. Fantastic. Okay, so for our discussion items today, the county administrator's office has volunteered to come in and give us an update on some of the changes to the county site and where to find packets and information related to public meetings, whether it's for the planning commission or the county commission or any other group. I don't know which of you is giving the presentation. Alicia, is that you?
Yeah, so Misha's gonna do that overview, and we just wanted to make sure everybody knew, and we were actually hoping more people from the public would be here to see the demo.
We have a lot of people who normally watch on YouTube, and then maybe we can clip it as well and put it on the Facebook page. Would you mind though coming up, because I don't know that the sound carries from the owl. Sorry.
And then one other
It's not.
thing we wanted to point out, or I wanted to point out, is I know there's been some confusion with Grand County Connects. And so we talked a little bit with Elisa and Jenna about just clarifying that that's just something for planning and zoning. And so we aren't gonna change anything on the website, of course, or the URL, but just to possible call it something reference Grand County Planning Connects or something,
Yeah, we're
just so
working
that
on something.
folks aren't going there looking for other stuff. And causing any confusion.
We're working on a title change. It wouldn't change the URL, so we don't have to worry about that, but yeah, just to give it so that people don't get confused with Brown County's actual website and try to go find agendas or whatever.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, we'll make sure that happens this week.
When you say you don't change the URL, then if I put in Grand County Connects, I'd still get there.
Correct. Yeah.
Hey, Lisa. Okay, you ready? Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so here you can see the Grand County Utah.net website. The big question is how to find the agendas. And there's a couple of different ways on the homepage here. You go to your government and there's, oh, hang on. Let's make that a little bigger. You've got a big button right here that says Agenda Center, and you've got a link here. Click on one of those and it takes you directly to the new Agenda Center. The way this is designed, it should be more mobile friendly. It also always pops up with the most recent meeting that's coming up. So everything going down is anything that's coming up. You can scroll back and it will load anything back that was in the past. You can also use the calendar here. You can choose a meeting date and it will pop you right down to whatever meeting dates are happening there. You can use the search box. You can also use the drop down here if you're looking for something specific. So if you're looking for the planning commission, we can just say planning commission. If you need to find old agendas prior to this module being put in place, there's a link to them right here. We cannot get rid of this old agenda center, and that's because per statute, you have to have your minutes and your meetings available for the public. So that link will take you directly there. There's a similar link at the top of this agenda center that takes you back to the other one.
So I am just noticing that on the old Agenda Center, there is that link there, and I've missed it every time, which is my error. But I do know, like, when you search for old minutes, it does take you here. I wonder, just because I don't know how the software works for this, I wonder if it's possible to make that a little more obvious, and I'll bet that might help with some of the
We are working on making both of those links a little bigger,
fabulous.
a little more.
Increase.
What do you
We
have?
discussed it and basically the statement was if Trish can find an agenda, anybody. can.
And how are you doing?
I do that.
We'll go ahead and open up your agenda for today, and I'll just show you some quick navigation on this so that everybody understands how that looks and how it works. The beauty of this is, like I said, the mobile part of it. So each one of these that you click on is it's a button. So you can click on approval of minutes and it opens up the approval of minutes, and then you can just pull up just those minutes. You don't have to go through the entire packet to find what you're looking for. That's part of the purpose of that. If you would like to see the whole packet or just the agenda lined out, you can go to this meeting files here and click on agenda, and it just pulls your front page basic agenda. So that just shows your basic agenda, and all of these are still linked. You can click on every one of these links and they work. Then you can go to the packet, and this will pull your entire agenda plus all of your attachments. And it automatically bookmarks it for you. So if you're one of those people that, you know, you're getting ready to go on vacation, you're not going to have service, but you would like to read up on it, you can download it. And you can go here and you still have all of your bookmarks and you can download it from here.
is really helpful.
I know I've had some serious user error trying to find it, so I appreciate it. I didn't pass the Trish rule. No, thank you so much. Anyone have any questions?
Can I throw in one request? If possible and easily to do, is there a way that we could get the agenda items numbered like we used to in the past with Roman numerals or whatever?
Absolutely.
Just,
That's something that
if it
Elisa,
doesn't turn into a disaster, I know some,
Uh-huh.
that would be helpful
yeah.
for me, maybe others.
it should not
Not to
be
be high
an
maintenance.
issue. We can, so if Elisa just gave me the template of what your agenda should look like, and that's how we built it. So if she, as soon as she gets that to me, how you want it numbered, then we can certainly go in and play with that and fix it on the template so that it automatically pops up with those every time, so you don't have to redo it every time. We can tweak, the thing is, we can tweak each individual department's or board's agenda summary to just kind of automatically populate with most of those sections. So everything that you use on a frequent basis, we can set it to, so that it does that, which is what the planning commission does. It looks very different from, say, let's go to our old one. And what everybody started with, because we didn't know who was gonna have what or how it was gonna work, everyone started with exactly what we use for the regular commission meetings. And then they were able to take over a couple of meetings, you can take that template and break it down until we have it customized for that department or that group. So everyone started with something similar to this, where it has, you know, your pledge and your citizens be heard and different timeframes. And then we've just been, as each group works with their agenda, we've been dwindling it down and adding other things so that it's customized to that.
Awesome.
So it's in progress, and it takes a little time, but everybody seems to be getting on board and working really well with it so far. Elisa and I really worked a lot on her templates, and I think they turned out really nice.
Yeah, thanks to you, Alicia. Thank you.
Thank
you. Since we're online, if anyone's watching, where would someone go to sign up for notifications of final posted agendas?
Good question. Here, so if you sign in on the page, but let's go, we should probably add a link to that. That's actually a good idea here. But if you go to the main Grand County homepage and you click on Notify Me, it will ask you to log in. And once you log in, because that gives your profile with your email address and everything you need, you go through this list and you tell it everything that you want to be notified on. So if you click on the envelope, it's going to notify you through email. If you click on the phone, it will notify you through text. So that's for anything you want access to on the website. So if you want to get news alerts, if you want to hear, you know, Grand Center newsletter, if you want any of those things, you just add yourself there.
Wow.
And now we're fancier than you thought.
I don't want any notifications.
And just so everybody knows, that Notify Me has been there for a very, very long time, and there are quite a few people who really use it a lot, and so it's nice. It's a nice feature.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time this evening and walking us through this. I know a number of people have reached out to me saying, where does stuff live? And I'm personally grateful to get this primer. And I also know the Planning and Zoning Department also has been, starting with this meeting, having a distinct social media post with information about the meeting and a link to the YouTube link and the Zoom link and meeting details. So I just think that's
That's cool, thank you.
We just keep getting better all the time.
yeah, well,
Almost perfect.
for those of us who spend Monday night hanging out, talking about county stuff, that's a very exciting update. Thank you so much.
And just a quick teaser. There is going to be a website redesign coming soon. Lots of change, but it will be very pretty. And I think the Notify Me button, as well as like boards, minutes, there will be some nice layouts. Yeah.
The layout of the new homepage is gonna be beautiful.
It's like the Grand County version of Steve Jobs and one more thing. Website redesign.
It's coming.
It's
And we'll be
coming.
giving demos at the commission meeting as it gets closer
Awesome.
to getting ready to be launched.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it just really helps to get that update, and I'll bet we can clip this part of the YouTube recording and share it so people can be informed. All right, we're gonna move on to our county commission update.
Okay, I will go really quickly. I do want to state that I can only stay till about 5:30-ish. I'm the hunter education instructor. So tonight we have hunter ed. I'm out teaching kids to use firearms on the side. That's great, right? So just some quick, I'll back up to our December 20th meeting. I don't think I've seen you all.
We didn't have a second meeting.
That's what I thought. Okay, so a couple things that you just might find of interest. We did solidify a real estate contract with Moab Regional Hospital on a parcel of land at Spanish Valley and Allen Street. It has basically been deed restricted 100% to workforce housing. If any of that property is sold, that deed restriction will follow that property. And also, the proceeds from any sale, half of it was, I think it's half, will go back to the county.
Can't remember, but yeah.
But it was sold at the appraised value of 1.9 million. And so, moving on, we signed a contract with Utah State for almost 50,000 for visitor management research. And I thought that was interesting, and I did throw in planning, because we've talked about Utah State in the past doing studies centered around planning. So I kind of threw that in, and it's something maybe I'll approach Wayne Friedman with, right? So anyways, because I think we have lots of research that could be done and applicable. We passed the budget. We did send a letter to the BLM regarding takeoff and landings in the county, and I have that letter, and I can pass it around if you were interested to see what that letter entailed. And then at the January 3rd meeting, we just assigned county commission reps and liaisons. So you will note that I am still here. And so you're stuck with me for another year. And the other thing that was applicable to you is that we did give a grant to HASU for a software platform to optimize their deed restriction program. So that would be applicable to you also. That's it. Questions, comments? All right.
Thank you very much.
All right.
We will move on to a review of our bylaws, and just a reminder here, as per our bylaws, if there are no changes that are suggested, then they remain as is. If there is a recommended change, that has to go through the commission, and so there is a stated motion if that does come up. Has everyone had a chance to review the bylaws, and are there any recommended changes anyone would like to move that we send forward to the commission? These went through several revisions over the last few years. They're getting pretty beat up, I think, in a positive way, positively. Any questions for staff or discussion? Otherwise, we'll move on, but I don't want to leave anyone hanging.
If there aren't any clarifying questions, I have a couple comments related to the bylaws, just business items that we need to make sure we're doing at the beginning of the year. So according to our bylaws, commission members are required to attend annual open meetings training. So I will send out a link for you all to have that. If you haven't done it, or if you need a refresher, then you can do the open meetings training.
Is that something everyone needs to repeat every year, or just
Yes.
have? Yeah,
Is it
let's
every year?
clarify.
Yeah.
I think it's every year.
So yeah, we'll all be doing it.
It's
So
quick.
yeah.
It's
They used to have
15 minutes.
pizza in person, just saying. They
There's an
brought it back.
online one now.
I know, but no pizza.
The nice thing is
Is
you
it
can
beer?
keep retaking
Or
the
just
guests.
pizza?
So you can join Tony across the street, grab some pizza, take it over your head.
Right. I don't know how I got into this.
Yeah, so I will send that link out so you guys can get that done. And then, let's see, the only other thing that we need to make sure we get done is look at the section for conflict of interest. And in the articles, it references ordinance 462, but the amended policy is ordinance 593, professional ethics and conflicts of interest. So PC members are required to review the ordinance and determine if they have a conflict of interest. If not, all they need to do is sign the pledge form and return it to me, and I'll get it with where it's supposed to be, where it lives with, within our system. And if you do have a conflict, you can go ahead and complete the disclosure form. Renee from Human Resources has a whole packet email that she's ready to send out to you all that has the disclosure form, the pledge, and a summary of the ordinance and the actual ordinance. So she's gonna send that all out to you. So just be looking for that email and you can, regardless of anything, you just need to sign the pledge form to say yes or no, that you do or do not have a conflict, and then just submit that back to us.
When does that apply? So I'm a little confused.
Every year we have to, at the
Oh,
beginning of
okay.
the year, all employees, and maybe we
Gotcha.
haven't been super on it in past years, but we are supposed to do it.
Okay,
Employees, volunteers, anybody that serves for the county or works for the county.
okay.
Yeah, we all gotta do it.
This is a, Stephen, do you mind actually coming up really quick? Because I think there's some questions here just to make sure. So, yeah, the way it's written is very like, if you have a conflict of interest pertaining to what?
Right, and
So-
actually, I have this little, this is part of Renee's little summary breakdown. She kind of goes through like how to decipher that. I didn't print out enough for everybody to have, but you guys can read that. It could be good to have that. Bring up your questions and see if that actually answers it. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
so Stephen, your interpretation of the current policy was if there is even the perception of a potential financial conflict of interest, is that?
So again, you're looking inside, for example, I did mine today. And so in mine, I own a law firm, so I listed my law firm as Stephen J. Stocks, and I also listed clients of the law firm as Stephen J. Stocks. I listed my wife as another person. And then you want to look towards any other things that you interact with in your personal life that could be implicated here. So if you own a bunch of nightly rentals, or if you own property that theoretically could be seeking a rezoning or things like that. One of the things is the more is better in this circumstance. Technically, it's a little bit cumbersome because on the form you fill out one per conflict, but sometimes you can kind of combo them on. But the goal is put down the more you can. And the reason why is those all go on file. And then if I have time on my hands, what I'll do is I'll help make sure that people are kind of staying within it, because somebody might not look at the circumstance and go, oh, I should be able to vote on that. But if you have something there that could kind of trigger that, the perception is we want to limit that as much as possible.
Okay.
Now, like for tonight, Mr. Evers, and this is kind of what he's done here. He's listed out what he wanted to say in a public setting. So if you're a commissioner and you trigger that, you have the opportunity to speak as a citizen. So you can come as citizens to be heard. If you really are very knowledgeable about your subject, or if you have a lot to say, you can write it all out just like he's done and then submit it. Then you can speak at citizens to be heard, and then you'll follow through whatever the protocol is for the commission for citizens of the public. And that may be a circumstance where if you had somebody that came, you guys will do your discussion, but if you had a follow-up question, you'd be like, I'm sorry, you're an expert on whatever.
Right.
Can you speak to that? But they wouldn't be able to jump into the conversation discussion like a normal commissioner would be.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of some of the nitty gritties of it. If you guys have questions, you can email me if anything ever comes up. It's one of those things, if you're kind of feeling funky about it and you're like, I don't know if, I don't feel great about this, then you want to disclose and ask the question, and that's perfectly fine. You can let the Commissioner Kadim know, or Chair Campbell, or reach out to myself. I'm more than happy to explain it. And sometimes I might not have a super rapid answer for you, and I'll have to do some research on it.
So we fill this out, all of us are gonna fill this out.
Correct.
Okay, so that's actually not something we've done in the past.
That's
which is
the
good to know.
pledge, yeah, that's something that I don't think we.
But then for any discussion or action item or vote, we also would need to recuse if there was the potential for
And, right.
any conflict.
And
Okay,
that's the recusal is not get up, walk out of the room. It's just wear your citizen hat at that point. And sometimes if you don't feel comfortable kind of putting on your citizen hat, and you're just like, I don't know you very well, Obi, but if I was a commissioner and Obi said something and maybe I was always the contrarian to Obi, if I could see him say something and I just know I won't be able to bite my tongue, maybe it's a perfect time to get up and go for a walk. But if you can kind of keep it to yourself and just, kind of just wait to be called on, you might want to have 15 things to be said on it. And if you wait for the chair to say, oh, Stephen, you might know about this, then I can respond. But that's the difference, because as chair, or as commission members, you guys have the ability to just jump in, conversation, dialogue, and have that wonderful experience. But really, citizens shouldn't be stepping on the chair's toes or the commissioner's toes. So that's kind of the game.
And Steve, question, yeah, a lot of the things you talk about, and a lot of people talk about are financial.
Right.
But we all belong to tons of committees. So for instance, if I'm a member of the Chamber of Commerce and something comes up that's about helping businesses and new businesses and stuff, I'm guessing that's nothing I'd want to ever recuse myself on.
No,
It
you
has to be more direct somehow.
correct. And we're all members of the community. So every single change that you make is going to be a change that affects you in the community. So there are different scales of conflicts of interest and some are direct. The most direct ones, think family, think property interests, think investments, business interests. It's not an exhaustive list, think inheritance. I mean, things like that, that'll trigger kind of that red flag that will look bad. And most of the time, you may not even have any of those, and you might be like, whoa, this is a lot. You guys feel like you're going haywire on this. The goal is to avoid the perception of problems, because for whatever reason, planning and zoning makes people upset one way or the other. Either you change things and you give stuff to people, then the other group feels upset, or you don't, and then the group that wanted stuff gets upset. And so it's just kind of, belt and suspenders, that combo, you want to do it right both ways. So.
No,
And if you have-
we never have any contention.
So this is the pledge. I put it up here so you can all recognize it. It's just a simple little one sheet thing.
Yeah, this one.
Everybody will fill this out and just check the box and then submit this back to us. If you do have a disclosure, then you'll take that extra step and the form will be sent to you from Human Resources.
All right. In terms of the reference having changed, we don't need to send a recommendation through on that, do we? That'll just be caught in the normal business of things. From 462 to
Oh,
5.
it does say like 462 and then, or any future amended version.
Okay, good.
Something like that. So I think it's okay.
Well, we normally don't have to send motions for like administrative changes like that, all right?
If you were already in it, it would be, if you're already cleaning the house, why not, do the
Right. If we have
cobwebs
something
and
else.
everything else. Any other questions for me?
No, thank you so much for
You're
coming out. Anyone else, any questions? No? All right. So seeing no proposed changes that would need to be motioned, we will go ahead and move on. Was that it for your list as well? Okay. So we will, where is that with us? Okay, so an update on a noise mitigation subcommittee update. So just to kind of remind us of where we started here, on November 28th, we had a public hearing where we had an item in our packet related to a proposed ordinance change. And we had 30 or 40 people attend from the public. And the general consensus from the comments being made was, I don't feel like I had enough notice about this. I don't feel like I've been consulted. I don't feel like I've been heard. And we postponed action, voted to postpone action on that item. Elisa and I had the opportunity to chat with the commission chair at the time in the commission administrator's office, and sort of through some conversations there with Jacques and so on, thought that a good course of action was to create this committee to bring people to the table. And the county administrator's office reviewed that and determined that because the public would be involved, in order to afford that kind of committee, the county commission would need to essentially generate the committee. And upon further reflection and some additional conversation, they have decided that now is not the best time to take that step. And so have essentially said, we'll let you know sort of where we go with this and what next steps are, but right now we're not going to create that committee. And so that's kind of where things sit. So there are a number of people who did reach out and express interest in being involved. And I think the county administrator's office or planning and zoning will reach out to those folks and make sure that they are kept in the loop of any future action there. And I'll just say, I feel really hopeful about seeing so many people step forward, even though, the decision is made to kind of hit pause right now. I think, I really want to just say thank you and express gratitude to everybody who volunteered their time, because I know volunteering your time to serve your community always involves a sacrifice, and I really appreciate that. So anything else that you would add, or are we good to move on?
Yeah.
Oh, I get a question on that. You had the ability to make subcommittees. So what was the actual, like, technicality that?
So that's a really great point. So when I had originally talked to Chairman Hadler and we looked through the bylaws, we do in our bylaws have the ability to create and appoint to a committee of planning commissioners. It was the involvement of the public. So to expand the action to like include members of the public, it would trigger different types of noticing, different types of public awareness about meetings and so on. And so that's why the county commission would be the body to formally create it. And there are examples across the state, like in, what's the town outside of Zion?
Springdale.
Springdale, they've recently, their commission created a committee that then sort of said, okay, this will inform recommendations to the planning commission because that's how information on planning and zoning ultimately reaches their town commission. But it was the involvement of the public. Now, my understanding is still if it's only planning commissioners, up to 3 planning commissioners, so that there wouldn't be.
3 county commissioners, I think.
Sorry, I meant in terms
Yeah.
of our ability to
Our
create
bylaws.
subcommittees for the planning commission itself. So we've done this in the past where we've said like, okay, these 2 or 3 commissioners, why don't you go out and work with staff on things like land use related to water? And that way we don't have to like organize the whole body and so on. Let's divide and conquer, go out, conduct discovery, figure out what could best frame that discussion as a body, and then bring your findings back so that we as a body could discuss it. So as long as we're not including the public in that as members of the committee. And I think for this one, because what we heard from the public was we really want to be involved, it became more complicated, and that's where the commission would need to get involved. Did I answer your question?
Not right now. I think everything's good. If there are other questions, I don't want to answer questions, but if there's more discussion, I could be helpful.
I mean, so I'm kind of wondering I'm kind of interested in like, if we did a subcommittee thing and then we're like, kind of revise some things or redo some things. I don't know if anybody else is interested, or are you saying like, yeah, just wait till the county council?
Well, so here's my thought.
Okay.
There's also been some interest from members of the planning commission to divide and conquer on things like water. That's a huge issue, and there's a lot of research to be done before we start to consider, any potential action. And so my thinking is for this particular issue, let's just kind of set it down, and then let's look across the board at what are the issues where it might make sense to have a dedicated subcommittee. And just because this is an area that the commission is already engaged on, I think we should wait for their direction on this particular one, since they've already sort of signaled a path forward. But other areas like water, like, even just looking across some of the issues related to housing specifically, that might be another one. But I think we should probably leave this one to the commission to direct on next steps, since it's, already with the public interest and involvement sort of triggered that need to have that next step.
I agree with your assessment, Emily, but I do want to make it clear for the record, the county commission does not actually have a timeline to address this issue.
And I can speak.
Thanks.
We have litigation pending.
I see. Yeah. Got that.
Cool, all right. Any further
Good job,
discussion?
Stephen.
Or questions?
You're easy, Tony.
Yeah, I know.
And so like moving on from that particular issue, I also know, and Elisa and I have been talking about, it's challenging when there is sort of a confusion about like the difference between the planning commission and the county commission and a recommending body and a legislative body. And oftentimes this is the first place where people find out about things that are going on, which, triggers frustration. And I think it's just great to see the county being more transparent, like joining our meeting and talking about the agenda center, what the planning and zoning department has done to be more transparent about what's on our agenda. As we go into a later agenda item, talking about potential, priorities for the year, you'll see a lot of, let's have a town hall, let's go out to the community, let's do a workshop, let's listen. So I think there will be ample opportunity to get people engaged, not just on this issue, but on all the issues, all the things. Ready to move on? Any other discussion? Cool, all right, so let's go ahead to, here we are, planning roadmap. So I will sort of just tee up this, well, actually, Lisa, why don't you just,
We can
yeah.
kind of,
Well, so at our last meeting, we only had one meeting in December. Everybody shared what they saw as the priorities that they've been hearing from the public and collecting from listening to the commission and our various town halls and the housing group, their event a few weeks ago. And Elisa and I took all of that and organized what we see as a tentative roadmap. Hopefully this format communicates well. So you've got on the first page, this Q1 period that we're in right now, and there's a lot of work that has already been brought up. We're gonna start at a high level, the discussion related to active employed households and so on. We'll come back in a future discussion and go through a proposed agenda for the housing barriers workshop. So Lisa can speak to these specifics, and then you'll notice as we get further in the year, things get a little less detailed, and that's because there is a lot we need to learn. We need to go to the meeting on the 18th and hear from the person who looked across all of our water studies and identify, oh, here's an opportunity that we could take to move forward. And maybe we want to have a subcommittee that's specifically focused on not just looking at individual parts of the land use code, but actually saying what could like integrated water land use planning look like, and bring that back. So do you want to take it from there?
sure. So, yeah, as per usual, housing is still our biggest, highest priority, I think. And so that's why that is the first item that we would continue on with the momentum that we had in 2022 with, you know, working towards alternative dwelling ordinance and getting that adopted. And now I think revisiting, and not revisiting necessarily, but really analyzing the HCHO program at this point and seeing how it's doing, where, you know, the shortfalls are, what successes there are, and having that conversation, and that also ties into just really looking at all of the possible ways that our land use code or other county requirements are, you know, impeding local housing construction and from actually going in the ground. So having our a workshop around this, I think, would be very helpful in bringing different experts from the building and development field in and learning what are the impediments to getting houses built. That also, all that information should really be tied back into the Moab Area Affordable Housing Master Plan, which is currently, well, has been in progress for many months, maybe a year. But it's kind of passed through a couple different folks in terms of having the leadership on it, or somebody really spearheading. And right now we have Noel, our planning technician, who's also serving on or participating in the housing task force along with the city, people from the city. So it's a regional housing master plan. And so it's kind of looking at county and city, how are we going to increase affordable housing? And one of the sections in this plan is specifically discussing the impediments to affordable housing. So anything that we learn from this process should go back into that plan. And it looks like that, sounds like we were going to be wrapping up a draft in February.
Yeah, hopefully
March.
by the beginning of February,
Yeah.
it'll be in rough draft form.
For review by you all and by the commission. So that'll be kind of the rough timeline for that. So moving on, hopefully, you know, we could be also starting to organize and get back into our future land use planning effort. And particularly this effort will be identifying areas for mixed use and multifamily residential zoning. So those are areas we know we don't have very much of, or any in some cases. And so we have many discussions of wanting to increase those opportunities for development. So Getting back into some focus groups possibly within those neighborhoods that may be most impacted by changes for the future land use map, and getting their feedback and listening to their concerns with anything that might be changing on the ground in terms of, well, not on the ground, but in the planning. So hypothetical rezoning opportunities and those kinds of things. So that I'm hoping we can get through, you know, by, I think we were shooting for like mid-spring, late spring, to have something finalized with the future land use map. And I don't know how realistic that is, but we can shoot for that as our goal. Another effort that has been discussed back in, gosh, over probably a year ago now, we were going to look at amending the OAO section, and we had started, staff had actually started amending that section for various different reasons, but one of them was to incorporate the workforce housing element of OAO campgrounds. And so we're gonna look into that and see if that is something that the county wants to pursue again and pick that effort back up. We will do that. And the only other thing for first quarter is January. There is going to be a housing fair at the end of this month. Another housing fair put on by the Housing Task Force. Is that correct? It's not HASU, just
Yes, Housing Task Force, and that's January 24th.
January 24th is the next housing fair. And it's focused on kind of resources for people looking for housing, looking for advice or guidance on being tenants and your rights as a tenant. And anything else?
And generally targeting towards families. It's being held at the middle school, and so trying to get a different demographic than those who attended the first housing fair. And so if you rent your property, or if you own your property, or if you're looking for help with your housing, kind of encompasses all of that.
Yeah, nice.
And the time on that? 6 to 8 p.m.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And moving on, quarter two, what we have planned, hopefully in between April and June, we may have the affordable housing master plan ready to adopt, and that would amend the housing element of the general plan. That also might trigger some minor edits to the housing chapter in the general plan, just so they align. And then finalizing, and of course, finalizing and adopting the future land use plan map, which would amend the land use element of the general plan. And then we would begin to look at land use code updates that would be coming out of both of those bigger long-range planning efforts, and how those long-range planning efforts kind of will inform and trigger possible land use code updates. So that'll be all kind of encompassing quarter two. So then that next section there, land use code updates to increase housing development based on newly adopted future land use plan and policy recommendations from the Moab Area Affordable Housing Master Plan. Do you have anything to add to that, Emily, at this point?
I think just calling out when we say updates to increase housing development, a lot of this work is specifically focused on housing for residents, multifamily housing, infill, and so on, versus, because that could be, I think, interpreted
Right.
maybe just differently.
Broadly, yeah,
Mhm.
right. That's a good
And
clarification.
yeah, I think that's the only thing I'd call out. Oh, and also when we say establish new multifamily residential zones, again, just to clarify, the land use planning map wouldn't rezone the county. It would say that if somebody wanted to upzone to a different use than is currently on the ground, it would provide a more viable path. for that, essentially.
Exactly. Yes. So then moving on to quarter three, our tentative priorities would be to finalize those land use code updates to increase housing for local residents. And move those through the process, which can take months sometimes when you're doing public hearings and getting everybody on board to review and edit and make sure that the language is all copacetic. The possibility could be out there during this time, if the commission so chooses, to direct planning commission and our staff to revisit the noise issue and work with public outreach or a workshop type thing. That would be all kind of pending the direction we will be getting from the commission. But one other thing that we could start doing in Q3 is to begin our discovery into water-wise planning, best practices and successful examples from other communities. And that would include outreach to water planners and those experts.
Lisa, I wanted to actually ask you
Yeah.
about that, because, so coming back to your point, Erin, as far as how could we better organize as a group to conquer more areas at once? Would it be, while this is something that staff's time probably wouldn't be able to be dedicated to until this quarter, is there any reason why we wouldn't want to just say, hey, let's find people who might be on the planning commission really interested in getting deep on this in the second quarter?
Yeah,
Okay, so maybe we'll look at that at our next meeting, and so if that's something you're interested in.
yes, definitely. I'm all for that. When I was looking at this and I'm thinking about our workload, I was just trying to space things
That's what
out
I'm
a
reading
little
this
bit.
as, is this is when
Yeah.
your office is gonna be taking on things. But We
Right.
could start to pull some folks together who wanted to collect some research, start to look at those other communities.
For sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we get, the USU students on board and want to assign them some tasks. Or, get them interested.
It's gonna be a big undertaking, so.
Yeah, for sure. That's a big one. So through October and December, Q4, what land use code modifications would enable us to support the residential, housing, and commercial needs of the community while balancing sustainable and responsible water management? So this would be getting really more, hopefully at this point, we could get more focused on what kind of direction we're going with the water-wise efforts, and starting to reach out to the public, after we've done kind of our baseline research and better understanding of what kind of direction we want to go. Then I would think public outreach, workshops, and then coming up with some recommended policy updates by the end of the year could be doable. So the tentative priorities would be, if we can, by the end of the year, adopt water-wise land use code updates. And if we need additional data, how might we identify that list and work with partnerships and form partnerships to measure and monitor our water security? And then the other big kind of looming, not looming, but sorry to use that word.
Climate action.
Big idea that we could start working on is, and I know that we've talked with some folks at the city and wanting to work on this together, which would be a climate action plan for our region, and to have it kind of as a unified plan between the city and the county, because otherwise it wouldn't really work. So that would tie possibly into looking at our sustainability element of the general plan and giving that a whole update and tying in a possible climate action plan. So I think that would be the discovery phase if we even got to it at the end of the year. So something to be thinking about. Also, dark skies, the city is working, and I don't know if they've already adopted, I don't think they have, because we met with them several months back, and they're working to update theirs. We're kind of taking their lead on, because they have somebody dedicated to do the research on what the changes might need to be for the dark skies land use code section to be a little bit more realistic and feasible for people in the community, and for us to be able to help implement that. So we do need to update that section in our land use code. That is something we could try to tackle at some point this year if we can get around to it. But I know that the city's already gotten a lot of progress towards that. So something else to be on our radar. And that's all I have for that. If you all have questions or anything I've missed that we need to add in here, or move stuff around, just shoot. Of course, it's all very ambitious and like tentative, so we'll see how it goes.
You know how you're seeing like the water thing, subcommittee thing, I mean, is that something we wanna think about, like, you know, you guys seem busy and stuff, like, is there anything we could be like, oh, hey, these guys kinda thought about this for you, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just an idea of
Yeah.
like,
I think that's kind of.
you know, don't have any time, but yeah, sure, I could like do something once every other week or something, I don't know, this.
Yeah,
I was looking at all this and I was like, well, where do we just sit here on Monday night and throw some ideas at you, or do you want us?
Well, that's
You know.
exactly the idea behind the committee is so that we can divide and conquer. And
Yeah.
it's not just every 2 weeks we talk about stuff and then we stop thinking about it. And because that's why things take a long time to get
Yeah.
done. And if there are people who have particular expertise and time to spare and wanted to contribute some additional time in research and discovery, looking at what other communities do, asking the questions, I think it would help us move faster.
yeah.
Wait, sorry, Tony has that.
Yeah, just a procedure question, talking about the like possibility of resource-specific subcommittees. I understand it was made clear that if we wanted to have members of the public on a subcommittee, that's actually a body that's created by the county commission.
If the
But-
public is gonna serve on it, not if it was something, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. But what if we were to ask an agency to provide a staff person to serve on a subcommission? I'm thinking specifically of Dana Van Horn and Anne Marie Aubry and folks like that.
So my understanding
count
is
as-
there's a difference between like serving on a subcommittee and the subcommittee going out and talking to you and gathering information. So, you know, the place it starts to get into territory is the noticing. That's really what it comes down to. You start involving people outside of this body, you have to notice it differently, and then it just becomes more of a burden, which is why the commission needs to say, we want to ask the administration to take on this burden or not. I think that's the big crux of it. But to your point,
Yeah.
like, if there was a water subcommittee, there's no reason you couldn't go out and just say, hey, Dana, can we sit down with you for an hour
Sure.
or two?
That would
Or
be
even
the
sit
easy
down
way
with
to
you
do
a few times.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, any of these efforts could have that subcommittee and commissioner subcommittee formation, you know, even the housing stuff that we'll be diving into just in the very beginning of this year, could be great to have somebody that is, if interested, you know, wanting to be kind of the expert or being out there talking to other experts and bringing information back. Be great.
So the areas I see that are obvious to maybe divide and conquer, we don't need to make a decision tonight at all. I'd actually rather we brought
Yeah,
ideas to the table, ask staff to think about it, give us your thoughts, and then at our next meeting, kind of, you know, see who's interested in what. Water is one, housing specifically related to land use changes resulting, or, you know, related to removing barriers, removing hurdles. Are there any areas in here that people are seeing that seems like I have a particular interest in this and expertise, or wow, this really feels like a big lift. We should probably be doing more than just meeting twice a month on, you know, seeing where we go. Even if it doesn't kick off until later in the year. This doesn't have to be a let's go find more work for ourselves exercise. It's like truly looking for where we can divide and conquer.
I feel like I had the ball rolling on the noise thing, yeah, I don't know, but that sounds like, I don't know, something else going on, but, you know, seems like the water thing.
Yeah.
And noise thing, I don't know if we should all, like, those are my, you know, like, exactly, like, throw out some ideas on that, you'll probably know better than we do what you, or I do, at least, I can't speak for anybody else. Yeah,
You have an interest in water and.
yeah, and the noise thing, actually,
And noise, yeah.
uh-huh,
The noise thing was really interesting because you actually had very good contact with lots of people who were upset at that
Yeah.
meeting. Several people
I went
got
and
to
talked
do
to a
that,
bunch
so
of-
it's,
Yeah.
was kind of an interesting start to actually
Yeah.
doing some interaction. I understand why it's off. I'm also interested in water. Tony knows a few people who do water,
Just
you
a
know.
couple.
I wouldn't volunteer for such a committee, but it's the one I'd be
Yeah.
interested in. And then the only funny thing is, when Emily said, it said begin Luke updates on increasing housing development, and you mentioned, well, particular kind of housing. And it always does strike me in these conversations, so I'll kind of admit, I really think we need housing for workers, and we need affordable housing for folks. I never know how fast we want to grow. I would not let that get in the way of getting affordable housing or workforce housing. But if I had my druthers, we'd grow slowly so we'd see what impact it has. Are we actually able to give people housing who work in this community 10 years down the line? What's the water situation look like? So we don't run past goalposts, but that's, I just thought I'd share that feeling for myself.
I was just doing some scratch math while we were running through that list. I think housing, I would love to talk about noise too, but we are more or less enjoined from playing in that sandbox for the time being. So in light of that, barriers to sustainable housing for residents is something that we need to start talking about. And going off the math, I was just imagining how much my least well-paid employee would, like, what would there be their target range for a housing payment, either rent or mortgage? And wages have gone way up this year. That's around $880 a month is what a responsible housing payment should be for my least well-paid employee. That is not what a mortgage looks like in this town.
Oh, gosh.
So I think I don't know, I have not heard us talk about the interface between economic development and planning. We're always throwing darts at the land use code thing.
Yeah.
And there's not the only slice of the pie that's holding people up.
Yeah.
So if we have that conversation, if we make a subcommittee, it's like on the water subcommittee, we have to talk to Dana Van Holm. She is the water broker, and it's a special service district, not a county body. But we also can't not talk to the Division of Water Resources and Water Rights, right?
Right.
Got to talk to both of those. So just thinking about on those two things, like what should we do?
Yeah, and there's other folks too. Jeff Adams is a person to talk to who knows a great deal about harvesting water off of roofs and putting the water into, so it can sink in into swales and stuff. There's a lot of good, there's also Arnie Hultquist on the Moab Area Watershed Partnership. But Dana's important because she controls water in many ways, and Mark Stilson is also, or whoever he have us meet with is important.
And I think if we are going to take the time, I've done the subcommittee from a county board thing before, and it is time intensive. It is not like it is more work than being on the planning commission. And you've got the planning commission on top of that. So I'm saying if we're gonna take that much time, we should really go for the jugular on these issues,
Totally.
right?
And that's the intent of kind of taking the step of laying this all out for the year and looking for, if we were to even get to this, when might it happen? So we can start those conversations now.
Yeah.
On a personal note, I would love to see whoever organizes around that topic, I would love to see maybe a town hall sometime in, March or April, before everyone gets completely bludgeoned, with their schedules, to bring folks like that in, do a round table so that we can ask questions, member of the public can ask questions, and sort of like kill 4 birds with 1 stone. I think there's creative ways that we can, multiply our time through things like that. And I know that the public has a lot of curiosity and interest, and that there are different opinions on things right now within the public, particularly related to something like water. It would be really helpful to have that, at least the one step of conversation in a really transparent forum. But also staff might not have the time to organize who, when, what questions, how, and so, that could be a good use of time. All great comments. Why don't we plan to make that sort of one of our primary discussion items at our next meeting. That gives us everyone time to sit down and think, what are the areas you might be interested in? To Tony's point, have time to dedicate to. Even what questions would you want to have answered? Who might you want to hear from? What timeline, what things might you want to achieve? And we'll just come ready to discuss at the next meeting. And if you have any ideas, if you know of any, oh my gosh, this, Tucson does this really amazing thing, we should look into it. Don't shy from sending that to staff. Sorry, I'm volunteering your email for that. But that way we can have a more informed discussion. And then if there are other areas that we've talked about housing, we've talked about water, noise, we know we're gonna just set that one aside. It's a good problem to have so much interest from the public to participate that, that needs to handle a little bit differently. But anything else anyone would want to cover, we can talk about that. And honestly, each one of those issues could probably be subdivided, but I don't want to do overkill first step, so.
And I want to make it clear, and that I think a subcommittee right now to go on noise, you guys should get going. We don't want to, I'm not sure how to say this, but, start bringing in the public right now. Does that make sense? But I think there's a subcommittee internally and you guys start kind of coming up with your ideas. I think that's great. So I don't want to squelch that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay. Cool, that's helpful.
I just, one thing I've heard, my girlfriend's a social worker, right?
Right.
And she's always like, you have to go out and talk to the people.
Yeah,
One of the things I've talked to
right.
two handfuls of people, and they're like, on like HDHO things, and they're like, oh, you're the first person from the county that's actually like talked to me about that. And I'm like, oh man, like, let's like, there's people like that HDHO thing. I'm like, I've gone and talked to developers. I'm like, hey, what do you think about that? And they're like, oh yeah. An hour later, it's like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I get it now. So, getting that kind of thing, I think is like what we should be thinking about a lot, so.
Yeah.
There were a lot of meetings on HDHO and they were pretty well attended in here in terms of workshopping. But of course, not everybody comes and attends, and maybe the outreach wasn't good enough to people who were developers, but regular citizens seemed to hear about it, and they had their own concerns with increased density in their neighborhood. So I mean, it was all, I don't know.
And that was an
Hundreds of people
experimental
At
program,
different times.
right?
Yep,
Yeah.
So
exactly.
let's learn
Exactly.
about what the experiment, like what people think about that
Yeah.
experiment.
Yeah.
So,
All
I know,
interesting.
Trish, just really quick, do you have anything you wanted to add related to this discussion? Okay. So, we'll plan on coming back and kind of revisiting this at our next meeting, maybe trying to divide and conquer a little bit. The commission will meet in the meantime as well, so if there's any additional suggestions, Trish can make sure that those are heard at our next meeting, and we'll go from there. Anyone else have any? Thanks for taking the time to wait.
You're welcome. And Tony, I'll see you over at Hunter Ed's. You can help out over there. I'll see you over at the fire
You say
station.
the word. Right on the screen, you got it.
All right. Have a good one, Trish. Okay, well, so I'm gonna go ahead and move us on. No further conversation, cool. Okay, so in terms of the active employee household definition, at this point, Steve is in recusal with his citizen hat on. Did you bring another hat, Steve?
I thought about it. It was like the first time I wore a hat.
we can ask him questions, right?
Yes, so, and then that's, like, we've had examples, we've had many examples actually in our meetings and public workshops with the commission where there have been members of the public that have a particular expertise. So, what Steve's done with his letter that he submitted as a citizen is to frame this issue from his perspective. And from, we can ask him questions about that if it helps us. I would say, so this is the first of many discussions we're going to have on this, but we wanted to start here because this particular question has come up multiple times, both from the perspective of the existing definition at the county level, the fact that it is different from the city's definition, And because of the sensitivity around this issue, what I was hoping to get out of this initial conversation is what questions do we need to have answered ahead of time for us to feel like we can adequately dive into this topic from an informed perspective? Are there questions we'd like to understand in terms of feasibility of construction of certain types of housing with the way certain definitions are written? Are there questions about why things were written one way or another? That's kind of what I was hoping for, so that staff is armed with sort of the general direction of the discussion, as well as if there is any perspective on which part of this we feel like we should tackle first. That's another thing that I think would be helpful to get out of this conversation. And Elisa, if there's any questions you have of the body specifically, I'll kind of leave it to you to help facilitate where this goes. I don't know that this has to be a long conversation. I would just love for us to be able to come back and revisit this with staff having had the opportunity to provide that context. So we're not catching those questions later on in the process, right? So I'll start there. Aaron, I know you've had conversations with a number of the developers of HHO projects. Do you have any, do you want to just kick us off? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but.
I am so sorry. I kind of zoned out when you were talking there, reviewing all the notes I had about, this thing. So, I mean, I'm sorry,
No,
like,
it's okay.
Yeah, dive in.
okay,
We also have Laura here who is wanting to contribute at some point.
Oh,
on-
fantastic.
Well, I'd love to hear what you all.
Yeah,
Yes,
to
let's do this.
say,
Let's
and
like kind of
then-
let some body discussion, and then there may be questions for Steve from the perspective of his expertise, and Laura would love to
Totally.
let you chime in as well. Would you facilitate? I'm gonna excuse myself.
yes. Okay, so I think Aaron, are you ready to? did you
oh, he's
wanna
our
talk?
vice chair, right?
Yeah, yeah. Are you ready yet? Oh.
Yeah, okay, so here's a couple things, right? I noticed this, 30 hours of employment per week. And, I have friends that work in the Forest Service on like their trail crews and stuff. And so I did the numbers with that. That is 180 hour or 1,080 hours. Okay, a Forest Service employee you got a lot, 1039s. So 1039 is 1,039 hours you can work before the government has to pay you benefits. Okay, so like, I see that as kind of a hang up. Like, I used to work on trail mix and stuff. We get like these people, we would try to get people to come in and but then to come and work on our trails and stuff, which is a huge part of our whole economy. And then it's like, a lot of those people like actually stay and live here, like full time. I've known several of them, they're like, oh, you've been here for, years. Just a thing that I
Yeah,
Um,
that's a really good.
saw.
Can I reinterpret that first one right off the bat?
Yeah.
What it says is an entity or entities, and what a lot of my guys who are on the 1039 or 1200, that if you incorporate entities, you're gonna talk about the second job and the third job, and they cross that, 30 hours a week on the year pretty easily.
Okay, yeah,
With that entities thing, it kind of covers all of your employers, the aggregate of all. So if you're, we
I
could
just don't want to exclude anybody that lives a lot here and like maybe does firefighting out in California. I don't know.
Yeah, but the fact that it starts out saying full-time, would that be a conflict for some of those folks if they're working like part-time for?
It is a paradoxical. That is paradoxical. A full-time employee of entities is not something that's really considered. I can't think of another place where that kind of
So maybe
phrasing
that would be the
exists.
thing to look at.
Yeah, how do we reconcile, Do we have our own definition of full-time? I don't know.
Do we need full-time in there, employees of entities located in Grand County who work 30 hours a
Yeah.
week?
Yeah, we don't need full-time.
Yeah, I don't
So
think
that'd be
the phrasing
useful
full-time
change.
doesn't need to be in there.
Yeah.
And then it's self-defined. And we could think about taking it down, what's 1080 divided by 52? I don't even know off the top of my head.
All I did was multiply 30 weeks times 30, because I knew the answer to that one was 900. Yes.
20.8.
So
There we go.
20.8.
Someone works more than 20 hours a week. you know, that'd cover the guys on the 1080 who, you know,
Didn't do any other work.
yeah.
Yeah.
Might go ditch runners, firefight.
Yeah, I just was like, kind of like, oh, hey, that's an interesting, you know, thing to think about, like, because it seems like a lot of people, that is a threshold for them. But, all right, then I have, so, I mean, our biggest thing with this is the whole like ownership, like inside, outside ownership. I mean, this is why, like, we had lawsuits against us and whatnot. My thing is, after talking to people, this is like an example of like what I hear and what I don't know, right? So like, you know, I've heard from several, you know, from developers and stuff, they're like, if we don't have inside owner, like Grand County only ownership, we can't build affordable housing for that market. And, you know, it's like, somebody in Grand County can afford a $200,000 house, but it costs $260,000 to build a house right now. So, you know, the whole thing is opening that market up to, you know, we all know we're talking about, like, this whole issue. That's what I was like, making sure, in the clarity of the law on this is like, to me, is like, we gotta make sure that's like you know, really covered in that. And I kind of was like reading the cities thing. I can't think of it right now. So right now, I'm seeing that, how I was reading it, I wasn't sure if it was like clearly defined, because I see an owner or owner's representative with a primary place of business within Grand County. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking, let you kind of explain. Do we feel like this adequately, where is this? What are we saying with this and where does it lie?
A lot of times people's businesses own their own home, right?
Mhm,
It's actually like the LLC that they own owns their house. And I think that's what they're getting at, right?
Mhm.
Like, I'm a GC and my house is actually owned by my LLC. And so that's what that is addressing, right? I don't like primary place of business. I think it'd be better if we said something like owner's representative of a business that was registered to do business. I think primary place is kind of ambiguous. I don't know how that's defined. But if if the entity owning a property was registered to do business in Grand County, the LLC was incorporated here, then that would be like a real legal indicator. I don't know.
So going back to one of the concerns I recall from the question of this ownership versus occupancy was, if it's gated to ownership, then there is a natural restriction of the mortgage rate because of what people can pay, so that would keep costs low. But now we're finding, because this was an experimental program, that what that has done is it's resulted in the units themselves being non-viable to even be constructed. And so the fact that maybe your mortgage would be lower, it doesn't matter because there's no mortgage, because there's no house. It doesn't pencil out. The flip side to that was the concern that if these units are bought by people who don't live and work here, then there's no, because of our inability to provide a rental cap, there would be no way to keep somebody from buying one of these units and charging $3,500 a month. And you could say, well, you know, they still would have to rent it to somebody locally, but we already know people spend well beyond what is viable for them, and or people have to bunk up and you end up in a very sort of untenable living situation. So we're left at this sort of like, it's not great either way. So one of the questions I'd want to have is, when the city did make the decision to go with occupancy only, how did they get past that concern? What other examples from other communities did they reference that made them feel comfortable with taking that approach? And, you know, or what, you know, how did the math work that they said, this is a way to create affordable options for locals beyond just the sort of more supply decreases prices economic principle? I just would really love to know that, because I think that was one of the biggest community concerns around that issue. That would be good to have in terms of informing potential recommended next steps.
Well, I mean, related to that, I feel like we have to keep in mind the difference between the zoning that they're dealing with and the type of developments that would apply for in the city was, if I'm correct, I think it's like multifamily townhomes, more dense development. So it was geared more towards a rental market anyway. And so, of course, with rental market, you're only going to be concerned with occupancy. That's just how that would work. You would never restrict anything for a rental for ownership. You have to, so. But for the county, when we're talking about larger subdivision developments where lots are being created, like 1 acre lots or half-acre lots or quarter-acre lots, the idea in my mind about ownership would be give locals a fighting chance to compete with outside investors to buy a lot, build their own place, maybe put a manufactured home on it.
Yeah.
But that would be where ownership should or maybe could apply in those cases, in that kind of a development where you're talking about selling off lots or even homes for that matter, single family dwellings that are for sale. But for multifamily, of course, it's going to be only occupancy.
Yeah, we had multifamily, we had condo, and then there's small lot. Yeah, I think we got
Well, all of it, this has always kind of puzzled me. I a bit understand the argument you're making, but if you would expect, of course, somewhat lower rents, even if it was an outside developer, if the only market is locals. And I think I was asked one time some question about how did I think it was written? So I'm in that funny position Mary McGann, I think, had, which was, I just want a belt.
Right.
So there's a piece of me that don't know how hung up I am on outside investors. And it's because Mary, basically same rationale that Mary had. But the question I think I was asked at one point, I can't remember for sure, was something like, well, did you ever envision an outside investor owning these things? And it had never come up in any of the discussions that I remember. I never envisioned that, but I don't know that was necessarily a bad thing as long as the ultimate owner, however you can make the outside investor sell these houses off. The recipients of these houses are 80% workforce. But that's kind of where I sit on that issue.
And for the record, just by raising that question, just so it's clear, that wasn't I actually find myself being more compelled to follow the city here. I anticipate that will be a controversy. It'll be a question that if we can answer it, at least it could help quell any controversy of returning to this. So I think it's useful to kind of understand it, but no, I agree with you.
And I don't have any idea where the commission would come down.
Right, yes.
And that's a different issue.
Which is the other reason of bringing this up now as a discussion item, to create plenty of opportunity for. Joanne.
I have a circulating question. I've seen this for a while and it's bothered me. I just never asked to be clarified, but number 2, under the academic employment households, it says it's like owner or owner's business, primary place of business in Grand County. There's like a ton of businesses that are owned by people who don't live here, that their primary place of business is here. So theoretically, if I ran like a bike shop that only exists here and only does business here, but I live in Salt Lake, I then own one of these houses with that business. Is that how that would work by that? And then.
So the fact that it would have to have somebody living in it 9 months out of the year is the clause that would keep it from being like a second home for somebody in that situation. So they could own it and they could rent it out to another local, but they would have to rent it out. They couldn't just sit on it.
I also wanted to add a thing with prisoners. People are incarcerated, they come out, they can't find housing. That's a huge stumbling block. I mean, so that was one of my other notes on it.
I also think in the proposed revisions that have, anytime something has come up, the way that we look at, I thought this was in the city definition, I guess it's not. Making people eligible who have children in schools, I know has been proposed, but that also then would preclude people whose children are younger than elementary school age, which troubles me particularly because of, you know, oftentimes people who are caregivers, we don't value work as work. And so a parent finding themselves in a position of not having a traditional wage with young children would be excluded from our existing definition.
Wait, what number was that?
Somewhere in
Somewhere
some
in-
drafts.
I do
that-
remember talking about this at some point.
This
Yes,
is again, pointing to the fact that
Yep.
this is just sort of all
Yep.
over the place. Just frustrating. I think let's pause here really quick because I know that Laura, you had some thoughts. If anyone has any questions for Steve, it's keeping a citizen hat on, but we will entertain any questions to our resident expert. And then Lisa, if you have anything you'd like to add, let's just pause the crosstalk really quick. So you're-
Well, sure. I don't know if I have any particular questions. I kind of just wanted to be here to be a part of discussion and answering questions. I think one thing that I have come across, and I don't know if this is particularly useful, but there have been a couple older folks who are retired or retiring who may not have lived in Grand County for 5 years and worked for 5 years prior. I don't know. I think that could be something to consider, or who knows, what if they were retired, or what if they retired in like 1990 or something and their employer no longer exists or something. It's like, how do you prove that they did live here for 5 years and worked here for 5 years prior to their retirement? That's one consideration that I've had. This is a little bit of a different discussion, but recently there was this Intermountain Lending Company. They're based out of Park City. They were helping a client receive a mortgage for Murphy Flats, and they wanted to go through Fannie Mae, and which I didn't know too much about. But essentially, these two guys told me that they brought the whole thing about Murphy Flats and what our deed restriction is to their representatives at Fannie Mae, and Fannie Mae won't accept it. And so that's a big hurdle because Fannie Mae is a way to make, the mortgages a lot more affordable. The good news is that, well, it's not necessarily good news. But this guy Ian told me that they've been dealing with essentially the same issues in Park City with their deed restrictions because they have not, it's not quite the HCHO, but they have workforce housing restrictions. And he essentially told me that you can add it's really all about the language that's on the deed restriction. And if we add a certain clause, he wrote it out to me, that they have tried using in Park City, and it has allowed folks to obtain Fannie Mae mortgages. But it says, upon written approval from the city, employees of business or enterprises not within the Park City School District boundaries, which is what they use instead of Grand County, may be considered qualified buyers when reasonable efforts to sell to those employed in the Park City School District boundaries are not successful. So I don't know exactly, but from Fannie Mae's perspective, it gives them the ability to allow what this guy said, basically this is a one-line exception, so it doesn't mean that really anything would change, but essentially that is what the representatives like to say. So
Very interesting.
I just learned about this about 2 weeks ago. And I also thought it was really interesting, and I was kind of like, okay, who do I bring this to? Because obviously none of us are actually involved in the mortgage process and the lending and the buying and all of that. But I think if that's not fixed or tailored, that's gonna prohibit more people.
People only want to feel assured that they can get their money back. And so people can't sell to somebody who's local and they can't sell, and then who knows what happens when they can't get their.
And I think I am no mortgage expert by any means, but I think Fannie Mae is very widely used. So, I could really.
That's really good. In the most recent omnibus bill, there was several tens of millions of dollars set aside to encourage loans from Fannie Mae to affordable housing. I think I may have forwarded the article around that reported on that. I'd be curious what we could glean from that, or that might be a good opportunity where the county just adopted the group to do lobbying on behalf of the county's behalf. I wonder, in addition to lobbying to the State House, if there's an opportunity to lobby to our state senators or congressmen on even just determining if that would be something that could apply to a program like this, or what might need to change so that we could have that information. So.
Yeah. So I know that's throwing kind of a completely different
No, I think
wrench in the
that's
mix.
very related.
But yeah, I had a call with these two guys at Intermountain Lending right before break, and they just brought those concerns, and they were saying that just by adding that one simple text that I read out loud was enough for Park City to be able to use that deed restriction, and Fannie Mae accepted it. So I don't know if it's, it's not gonna be an easy fix, but that could be all it takes. But I think that is I don't know if that really affects necessarily what the rules and regulations say, if we're talking about actively
Well,
in households,
there
but
is a foreclosure exemption that was in the amended rules and regulations, and I don't know if that is if the language is what Fannie Mae would want, or I'm sure they saw this, the amended version of the rules and regulations, so I don't know if they needed something beyond that. It sounds like maybe they did.
yeah.
But I think that would be very applicable to what we're talking about with, coming up with ways to make this work.
Sure.
The other thing that I think is really interesting that you mentioned Park City doing is using the school district boundary instead of the city or county boundary, because we could maybe benefit from that as well. And I know there's been, I don't know if there's a bad side to this, but I would think it would be only good, is to allow folks from San Juan County to buy HGHO units. And so if we use the school district boundary, that would encompass, the San Juan County
All the way
area.
down to the south.
Yeah, in the south, yeah.
That is more
And Laura?
consistent with the city.
I'm sorry, page 29 of the packet is where they have that foreclosure exemption. We've got the
Number
packet.
5.
Number 5, yeah.
It's a lot of
In section
legalese,
2.
and I don't know.
Seeing that this was a Murphy Flats thing,
Really quick,
Oh.
before let's not use specific developments in the crosstalk and conversation, just for the sake of privacy. Let's talk about open to different types of developments.
have you found, Steve, that you've had difficulties with banks or loaning?
And you don't have to answer the questions. It's up to you if you want to go into those details.
That was like a paperwork thing that could, or any resolution?
No, what I will say is where we encountered or have encountered an unforeseen obstacle, and it's navigable, but in a condominium development, a condo, only 50% of the total units can be owned by an entity, it's like a business. So whereas we potentially, before we knew about that, we would have thought, oh, well, businesses here could, because there was a huge appetite. All these businesses were like, yes, we'll take them because they want to their employees. Then we learned, oh, wait, Freddie Mae, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac won't lend if 50%, or sorry, larger than 50% of the condos are owned by entities, non-people, non-primary or secondary, like home occupants.
That has more to do with the condominium aspect
That's just
than an
condo.
HGHO deed restriction.
Correct.
Okay, I just want, I'm clarifying.
Yeah, no,
That's- Yeah, okay.
So that's everything.
Yeah,
As far as lendability, yeah, it's kind of secondary to the deed restriction, but
So was anything we had a barrier to that, to them? A loan?
in terms of the deed restriction.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Do we need, I would hate to see a local trying to get a loan for something and can't get it because of some kind of like thing that we got going on. That's that's why I'm getting, I guess that's my question.
The other roadblocks of how the ordinance is currently written blocked many people before they were able to get through to that point. And to my knowledge, the deed restriction has not prohibited folks from lendability.
Okay.
Steve, since we have you here and we have Laura, who can kind of speak to the verification process, in your letter, you allude to one potential path, including simplifying the verification process. Would you enlighten us a little bit into why these specific recommendations that would help simplify? And I'd love Laura, like, just to understand if we don't do this, and here, I'll actually.
Yeah, I didn't actually.
And I'm not trying to like this, I more would like to understand what could stand in the way of simplifying to that degree, because this is what the city does, or if that just seems like low hanging fruit, I guess. Here, let me show you, sorry. Let me give you a packet of information and ask you to interpret it. No, so just to clarify, so Steve, in the letter that Steve as citizen submitted, he said, one potential concept would be to simplify the verification process, borrowing from the city as I'm hovering over you. Verification of occupancy could happen from the Grand County tax roll, master record of ownership and primary residency, or an occupant rent lease agreement of not less than 90 days. Or B, verification of qualified active employment household through an employee verification form or home occupation business license. I guess if that's what the city does, I'm just curious why the county wouldn't do that, or if it's just like, I don't know. That seems sort of, there's a clear reason.
Are you asking me that?
Only if you have it.
Oh.
There's no, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
If you're not ready
Based
to speak on it too, like, I just would love to.
Sure. Well, I do have an employee verification form that I've been giving folks the option to use, if they'd rather have their current employer fill that out rather than like provide pay stubs.
Okay.
Or taxes. Not sure about the tax roll, but also to me, the occupant rent or lease agreement would make sense as well. I mean, that would show that they have been occupying Grand County for longer than 90 days. Yeah,
So it's,
those all feel fair to me. But
Can you ask that again? Sorry, I was digging around.
I did a
for
horrible job of
letter.
asking what I was asking.
I wanted to look back from,
Yeah.
we had a recent email from our realtor that kind of outlined the folks that had issues that weren't qualifying. And so I just wanted to see if any of it was on the lendability, because I couldn't remember offhand, so.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was.
No, you're fine. And
Doing
Laura
two
sort of
things at
spoke
once, Laura.
to the question. So you had offered a suggested, in your letter, you had offered a suggested path, and Laura just confirmed that that actually is almost taken care of by the way that we could verify. What I'm trying to identify is what possibilities are there that we have to work with potentially here?
I mean, I've been trying to think about this retired piece. I do remember at one point, there was a little argument with Zachariah, who said, well, for retired people in affordable housing, we have to worry about how wealthy they are. If they have $250,000, in assets or something. And I said, that's not enough for a person to live who doesn't have pension, or maybe not even Social Security. If my sister doesn't have, because she's a teacher in California and they get away with it. But then I was trying to think, so what would the criteria be for a retired person? I can only think of kind of income level, retirement, savings. And then I think to myself, but that's not the HDHO. It's about working. That's more about affordable housing, which we will start to address again at some point. So those are just my ideas thinking about it. Maybe this isn't a program for retired people who haven't worked here. But
Yeah.
just a thought.
My only thought on that is like, you know, getting a work, like, I had a conversation with my mom, like if she, I was like, maybe I could build an ADU for you. Maybe, but the senior center is full. There's like a 3-year waiting list to get somebody in there. I could see slipping it in with like, oh, you're related to somebody working here full time, but then I also, I was telling Emily this, I have a problem with the term workforce housing. It's like your value and your worth are only related to the fact that you provide something of value to the economy. And I know that if we open that up, we'd have every Californian retiree that can't afford to live in San Obispo coming in here, but
And
I
I
mean-
and I'm not sure, you gotta help me, I don't know the legal implications, but as I understand it, workforce housing, you can do affordable housing, and making developers sort of pay for it is less clear at this point in Utah.
Like having it include a required affordable housing policy is no longer, you can't adopt those kinds of policies anymore. But you can incentivize, so
Okay,
we can provide, and we are gonna be looking at that in getting our land use code up to par with better incentives.
and by the way, it's exactly the example I was thinking of. What if parents want to be near their kids?
Yeah.
And they don't have a lot of money, what's the program for them here?
And for the sake of workforce housing, one thing that we should talk about is the cost of childcare is prohibitive to many people in this community. And so if having your parents or, some sibling or something come and help you with childcare, that may be your only path to viability to participate in the workforce. So when we talk about workforce housing, there's multiple, it's, gosh, it's so nuanced.
I was gonna tell you, the kids of parents who don't have a lot of money aren't buying houses here.
So let me play back some of the things that have been raised again, because the purpose of this conversation is to start to identify opportunities that we could look at to encourage particularly the full build out of the vested properties that have already potentially. So this is the question. Is it to encourage the build out of vested properties? Is it to look at future development possibilities and probabilities that could be viable under the future land use map, right? And we're, this is gonna have to be iterative either way. Some of the things that I've heard. So number one, we know that the city's definition is different from the county. And there's been several comments in favor of the ways that the city lays out their active employee housing, building upon the county's definition, possibly improving it. So maybe there's a easy path there. Two is this question of occupancy versus ownership. I raised there's some data or just some background research I'd be curious to know. But certainly within the boundaries of Grand County, we have seen that there does not appear to be sufficient viability to afford ownership of these units to bring them online. Maybe there's something to looking at the Park City model to make it easier to lend. Maybe there's something at looking at the Park City model to expand the definition of who could potentially buy by geographic area, like a school district versus a county. Maybe there's something to relaxing the occupancy standard altogether. And so I think I have heard broad interest from the community at relaxing the occupancy standard. I think the commission needs to be involved in whether we go, how far down that path we go before we take any further steps. But I would say from the conversation at the table, it sounds like it's something we should at least bring to them and say, is this something we should even look at, continue looking at? Ultimately, the commission is going to be the body that is going to determine whether or not that gets revisited. So let's do that fast. But
I think that we don't have, like, this was an experiment. We don't have the info, like I was saying before the meeting, like do we have a real estate agent that's like, oh, hey, if we opened it up this, then a house is going to cost this. If we open this, like, we don't have that data. So we're just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, that's nice. We could do that. Or no, that'll bring too many people that shouldn't own houses here. Like, this feels like something that like, we don't know, like.
So on that note, the next item on our agenda is actually to talk about a workshop I'm proposing that would help to get us that information. So I don't want to just totally take us off this topic abruptly, but it's a good point. Any further comments here that anyone has for Lisa? And Lisa, any other questions you have any clarification on?
No, I think this was a really good discussion and I just look forward to, getting into it more and continuing it.
It is 6:10. We do have one person who's joining us listening in. I just want to make sure, since we breezed past our 6 o'clock citizens to be heard, that nobody is here to make a comment as a citizen to be heard. And if you are, if you could just put a note in the chat. I'm going to keep going, but I will pause for that comment if there's anyone who wants to speak. Okay, so this moves us on to, Steve, welcome back to the discussion. Thank you, everyone. Okay, we have no public hearings. Okay, future considerations. So Elisa and I first started talking about this idea like a month and a half ago of this workshop. And what I did is I just kind of drafted, I facilitate and run workshops like this a lot, not on this particular topic, but in similar formats. And so I wanted to get this in front of you all to see kind of how we might be thinking about this and tentatively doing this at the end of January, early February.
Yeah, there's a little skip period where we don't have our planning commission regular meeting because it's a long month. And so we were thinking like the end of January, first week of February, that week could be a potentially good workshop time.
So there's this idea, without getting onto all the lovely jargon of like service design and everything, there's this concept of a journey map. And it's essentially, we all have our own little mental models of what it takes between somebody saying, I'd like to build a housing development, and actually getting someone ready to move in. And a lot of these comments have been raised. We hear a lot from developers. We don't hear a lot from real estate agents and lenders. We don't hear a lot from administrators who say, look, this administrative step is actually necessary because of X, Y, or Z. And certainly we don't hear the perspective of the people who get stuck in this as potential occupants of these houses. And so the intent of coming up with a journey map is essentially to get everybody working together to say, look, this is how it should work. And here's a problem, and here's a problem, and here's a problem. And we can start to isolate, this is where progress stalls. This is the step. This is the form that catches 40% of people. This is the lending issue. And then collectively say, well, how could we maybe overcome that burden? So as opposed to just talking about administrative burdens like this giant spooky thing, as opposed to talking just about, oh, so-and-so can or can't live here, let's actually get people in the room who can give experienced perspectives and specific examples of when we try to get somebody in housing and we have this issue with, they say, I would love to buy this, but what if I lose my job? What happens to me? Great. Let's make sure everyone's talking about these cases so that we can make sure that our policy, our land use code, and the policy of the county isn't the reason why people aren't getting into homes. There's any number of other reasons, but what could we do to make it so that we aren't the blocker, the county isn't the blocker, as well as the opportunity to then inform our partners, departments, hey, this isn't something that we can do administratively or legislative even, but you need to be aware that this is a potential hurdle. Maybe it's an educational issue. So I have a tentative agenda here and really just wanted to make this first step being putting it in front of all of you. And so you could kind of redline this. We've got time. If you have questions, if you have ideas, you can raise them tonight, or you can take this with you and bring it back to the next meeting. But essentially the timing here would be 2.5, 3 hours, maybe conservatively, with time for people to go to the bathroom and stuff. It's really important that the time frame here for each of these exercises is very intentional. For example, like the initial brainstorm is very short intentionally. We actually know this from psychology and getting people to think outside the box. Giving people a short time frame to just write and write and write actually results in more written down and more specifics. And then there's lots of time for discussion. There's lots of times for putting sticky on the board. And basically what you end up with is a list of all of the steps that one would expect you to have to go. You have the perspective of builders, of administrators, of real estate agents, of people who are applying. And then we literally with red sticky dots say, this is a problem, here's why, this is a problem. Hey, there's 5 sticky dots here, 5 people in the room say, this is a really big issue, great, let's pause on that. Let's talk about why it's an issue. Let's make that the framing of a specific discussion. So when we do come back to the planning table, we say, we need to solve this issue. We need to solve the issue that people get to this step and they don't know how to get this information, or they get stuck on this application, or this policy stalls them and they can't move forward. And Steve made a comment this earlier in his response to one of our questions, which is, look, the issue isn't here. The issue is here. We can debate about making this step easier, but if they never even reach that step because issue here, well, this is where we need to start. We need to manage to where the constraint is. So that's the concept of this. And I guess, any thoughts, any questions?
This looks great.
I have a thought, just came to me actually, is that when you were talking about the initial brainstorm, I feel like that session that we had at the housing fair, that was that group of people kind of doing that same thing, and some of those folks were from the building community. I would think that it would be great to build on that. So to get that data, all whatever that qualitative or quantitative data that came from that workshop is, and if we can present it back to this group in a way so that we can say, these are the things we all heard at the housing fair that might be applicable to this conversation, so that we're not like kind of doing that whole thing over again and getting some of the same, just just in the essence of time to try to capitalize on what we've already gathered from that conversation, which is very much related to this.
And I think that's a great idea, and not to be a stickler to like the process. I think what we want to make sure of is that we're not missing perspectives of people who weren't there.
Right.
Especially given that that was very dominated by the builder and development community, but there are also, the perspective of, like I said, real estate agents, lenders, right, public officials. There may be reasons why some of those burdens exist, even if they're arbitrary, even if they're not the right reasons, or there are other ways of approaching it.
For
So
sure.
there's a delicate balance there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, we
I think
definitely
starting
want
with
to
a
still have a
framework.
brainstorm, but present the information from the housing fair so that that's there, and then we can build on that as well. And respond to it.
It would be great to get that and see if we can start to format that into like either a framework that could go out with invitations for this, or some starting framework that people look at, kind of similar to when we ran the future land use maps. You had your, we already had the definitions of housing, for example. We didn't have to start at square one, but it was still, there's definitely ways we can reduce waste. Cool.
What were those respective dates again?
That week, final week of, so the housing fair at the middle school is on January 24th. So then it would be the following week, maybe midweek is a good time. That would be February 1st, but a Wednesday.
I would only be able to make it if it was a Monday or Tuesday that week,
Okay.
but obviously I'm not, if I'm the only one. but-
And we could do this more than once. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be, And when we, we're already in first and a half week of January, so getting invitations out. Yeah, I'd love to move fast on this, pick a date and roll, just so we can get people involved and get it noticed, because it would have to be public notice.
I mean, the following week too is possible, the 6th through the 10th. It could also be a possibility.
That might be easier. Does everyone want to take a look at their calendars when they get home this evening or tomorrow and get an email over to staff sometime in the next couple days of blockers within that area? Like, I know I won't be available this day or this time. And then staff could come up with a proposed date. Can you go with that?
Is this specific to the HDHO or just
Housing barriers in general.
housing barriers?
Including
Okay,
HDHO.
okay, because we were just talking, you were leading into that.
Yeah.
Can I put one thing on
Yeah.
that? Like, so with the HDHO thing, I would really like us to do like a workshop with, like, I've talked to 3 guys that have done those, and 2 of them were like, never again, and I told them, I was like, I would like to convince you otherwise. I really want to hear what, in this, just, I think it's a great idea, but I think it's, those guys have specific things in certain language.
Yeah.
And like, that would be way too technical for like this kind of thing, because you got somebody just like trying to find housing, and these guys are like in 4.7.21, it says this.
Right.
So this is great, I'll do that, but I kind of want on that HDO thing, I think we need to like talk with some people that have done this, and, because there's been, you know.
Yeah, and I think that there's always been the intention to get to a point where we would specifically focus on reflecting on the HGHO program and evaluating it in like kind of a formal way, like
Okay.
really figuring out, okay, these are all the projects, this is where they are in the timeline of the build out, and you know, where are they at? What are they doing? What's going on? What are the barriers? And
I get it, and this
really
isn't
getting into
that, so that's fine, I just was throwing that.
There
out
will be
Okay.
overlap.
Okay.
I mean, that,
Yeah, of
that-
course.
yeah, I think, and that's the purpose of this like roadmap, and lots of times we want to dedicate time to listen, to learn, to evaluate, and to just keep iterating, you know, as opposed to sitting on something or trying to do everything at once.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great call out. Just because we're doing one thing doesn't mean we can't do another.
Okay,
But we have, like, I've had people just over the last several months ask me questions about, like, I'd like to build, you know, a more dense development that includes tiny homes, cottages, and some single family homes, but I feel like completely overwhelmed by these definitions. So it's generally I think there is no overlap. Anyway.
okay,
Maybe that second week in February makes no sense because it gives us a month to plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like that.
Let's get dates back to staff that we know were blocked. Any other thoughts or questions or ideas anyone has?
What is the county commission's perspective on this? Are they interested in this? Are they in the loop that this is something we're eyeing up?
I've talked to a couple commissioners about this. I mean, we've been talking about this for, you know, almost 2 months now, kind of proposing this idea. The thing I want to be mindful of is the intent of this is not to assess or build policy. It's to understand where in the process people are getting stuck. That's step one. And I want to make sure that where we do have, including everyone here as well, people participating, it's not from the perspective of asserting our own thoughts or our own perspectives. It's listening and learning and bringing the experts to the table who can really tell us, this is what's happening on the ground. This is what I'm experiencing. Because that's the perspective that often gets lost. So, you know, absolutely. But like this group right here, like these are the people whose voices we need to be hearing from, because they're the ones who are going to determine whether or not something's actually working or not.
And you're saying, like, essentially akin to what Laura was talking about, where we have no idea, but the financing institution is saying, well, there's this funny, weird thing where this language is otherwise.
Yeah. And I've talked to people in all of these groups and run this idea past them as like a high level draft, not this, but just like, would this be beneficial? And I have heard unanimous, yes, please, let us get in a room together and let's talk about it together. I think Tony and
Breaking
Lynn
down
will
the
be-
silos.
And just back to Aaron's point, although the initial brainstorm does not say HDHO, a lot of people will kind of read it as, I mean, it's for at least partially workforce housing. As I read it, someone is interested in building housing that at least in part is intended to be occupied primarily by primary residents of Grand County, particularly wage earners. So it would certainly be the fact that a lot of people who wanted HDHOs to build them would look at this and think that was maybe the topic a bit, but it's.
I forgot I'd actually put that in there, but that's a great question. Let me ask you all. So when I spoke to a couple people at the housing fair, what I heard was it would be great to kind of isolate this too, that like I'm building housing for open market rate housing for people who primarily live here, because it's not that their problems are distinct from others. It's just, if we try and do, how do we build multifamily apartments and this and market rates large lot residential, it's just so much.
Yeah.
So let's start there because that's where we see the bottleneck and that's where we see the need. And then step 2, 3, 4 is.
I'm not against this focus.
So that's my question though, is everyone comfortable with that being the sort of framing of this first one?
Yeah.
We should do that. I'll caveat though. I mean, I think this is useful and I'm excited for it. But we're sitting here asking like, let's step 1, what is the roadblock? And you know, if the average household income in Moab is $50,000, you should not buy a house more than $200,000. And affordable housing projects that we make cost $350,000. So there it is.
Yeah.
Like, let's just be real. That's it.
I think the challenge we have is that the city is limited in terms of, or the county is limited in terms
Yeah.
of what it could do.
No,
But I don't
it's-
think we should lose that.
No, we
Right.
shouldn't lose that, but we need to like, first and foremost, there it is.
No, it's good.
I was just doing the math on it. 221 is the absolute maximum house that my least paid employee can afford.
Maybe you need to pay more.
17 an hour. We do need to pay him more, man. We do.
Sorry, I mean,
No,
like-
you're right.
You're
You
nearing-
call Governor Cox and tell him that, man. Pay us more.
Yes.
I'm with you.
We're nearing the bottom of the hour, so just to kind of recap, take a look at this. You might read through this and go, I've got some, show this to other people, you might hear other ideas. Let's come back, let's tentatively set that second week of February. At our next meeting, we'll run through, we'll finalize a workshop agenda that everyone's comfortable with, and anything else anyone wants to add. So, any other future considerations that anyone has? Steve, you need to start bringing two hats.
I will.
Like a hard hat for your developer's hat.
Okay, anything else? Anything from staff? All right, that, then if there's anyone who wants to move to adjourn, I think.
I move we adjourn.
this is the end.
Second.